Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Ellen Lord, and I'm the webinar coordinator for OR Manager. Welcome to the OR Manager webinar series. This morning, we are going to be talking about data-driven analytics for better perioperative decision-making. Our two speakers today are going to be talking about the field of analytics. Our first speaker is Brian Watha, Associate Vice President at Surgical Directions. Has extensive experience in OR process improvement, business intelligence, and quaternary medical center perioperative service, where he has been responsible for all end-to-end OR processes as the principal manager engineer. Brian has a Master's of Health Science Administration degree from the University of Michigan and has completed a one-year Executive Administrative Fellowship at Health Alliance Plan. He serves as a graduate mentor at the University of Michigan School of Public Health, and he helps teach a biotech startup course at the Ross School of Business. He also has a Lean Six Sigma black belt. Our second speaker today is Michael Basenek. He is a business consultant for Surgical Directions and manages analytics projects that reduce cost, drive revenue, and increase ROI for healthcare clients. He specializes in analytics research, implementation, and strategy. He is experienced in advanced predictive analytics, data visualization, and machine learning. By clearly communicating complex concepts, he has helped hospital leaders make confident, data-supported decisions. Michael has a Master's of Science in Analytics degree from the University of Chicago, and he is a summa cum laude graduate of Florida State University, where he earned his BS degree in chemistry with a minor in mathematics and was a member of the Phi Beta Kappa Honors Society. We'd like to welcome all of you now to this presentation. I turn it over to Brian and Michael.
Thanks so much, Ellen.
Thank you. It's easier when I'm off mute, so appreciate it. Thanks for everybody's time for joining us today. So I'm Brian Watha, and my partner Mike Bezedik will be going over this presentation. So this is really giving you guys a kind of a deep dive into some of the nuances we evaluate when we go into, things that pertain to OR efficiency and particularly block time design, and using the data that you collect from your EMR systems to drive thoughtful, intelligent decision making. Oops. So with that, you can see that there's a larger trend in healthcare today, payers shifting to value-based reimbursement. And as your institutions migrate towards these patterns, you're going to see there's going to be a larger requirement on using the data you collect in your EMR to make sure that you're meeting the metrics necessary to get reimbursed, and maximize your margins. Right now, about 60% of bottom lines come from perioperative services, and through this, we're going to see more and more of the dollar shift and the risk towards institutions if they don't get a tighter wrangle on their analytics. So it goes back into why our focus on perioperative services. Again, like I said, 60% of high-performing hospitals' revenue is based on a efficient running perioperative department. Successful systems under the value-based purchasing and ACO models are going to require both surgeons and payers providing more value for social services, and that ultimately comes down to the equation there: value is going to equal outcomes over cost. But again, part of this is going to be going through, what is cost, what drives some of those decisions, and how do you optimize your OR in a way to maximize, your efficiency and those sort of things. With that, I'm going to kind of go over the things we're going to look at today. We're going to really talk about block time and scheduling, and how that connects to labor and productivity, anesthesia costs associated with that, the nursing costs associated with that as well. And then the clinical outcomes that we're trying to achieve with a optimized block grid. And again, all of this is really just trying to maximize the data that you collect in your EMR and use it to drive decision making. So I'm going to hand it off to Mike, and we'll go over a brief case study that we have here at East Coast Community Hospital.
Thanks, Brian. This is a client that Surgical Directions engaged with some time ago. And really, there were kind of a slew of issues. Surgeons were unhappy with the OR efficiency, issues with surgeon satisfaction. They had high degree of same-day cancellations. Actually, that's a typo. It's 5.8%. You'll see on a further slide. Same-day cancellations. They did not have a collaborative governance structure. Oops, I think we're on the wrong slide. Around half of their cases did not start on time. They had excessive turnover times, again, driving surgeon dissatisfaction. So we had to design an intervention that was really kind of a multi-step process, but integrated analytics as a part of the strategic solution. What ended up happening is we were able to reduce the turnover times by addressing some of the things that I'll go over in a minute, improve their OR utilization, again, by optimizing the block system, and as a result, provided the hospital with capacity to expand their OR capacity. And they saw a pretty drastic jump in volume as a result. And they also built in some wiggle room, which contributed to that as well. And overall, the surgeons ended up very happy with the results and were able to go about their day much more efficiently. Here are some of the metrics that we use to kind of benchmark the hospital. The governance structure was not collaborative. There was not a daily huddle in place. The block schedule was all over the map. There were some 8-hour blocks, a lot of partial 2- and 4-hour blocks, very little open time. They were completely blocked. There was no capacity, and suboptimal block utilization. They weren't running as many cases as they could per OR per year, mostly because of their poorly designed block system. They had high day of surgery cancellations, which tied into their pre-surgical optimization process. Turnover times were excessive, largely due to the structure of how their flip room policy was designed, and the cases were not going in on time. You can see kind of a lot of operational issues right off the bat here. So the first thing that we wanted to look at is how can we track the surgeon productivity? How can we improve the utilization of the OR, given that it's a finite resource? Well, the first thing we looked at is the structure of how their flip rooms worked, and surgeons were doing very, very long cases, sometimes revisions in these flip rooms resulting in poor utilization. The other room would sit unattended for long periods of time. There was poor nursing morale, and they also had some issues in central sterile processing. The first thing we like to talk about is, why is efficient block scheduling important? Sort of as a philosophical question. One of the key parts of efficient block scheduling is that it establishes efficient drawdown and optimizes the room utilization. You're looking at roughly 2.5 FTEs dedicated to a room. You have high anesthesia costs, in terms of dedicating their productivity to that room. It's important that your block schedule is designed in a manner that your entire OR runs efficiently. And we can reduce costs, as a result, improving our utilization of our rooms. And ultimately, this reduces the cost per occupied bed, which all hospital administrators are interested in knowing about. The visualization that you see on the side is a day-of-week visualization, what we call a rooms running heat map. And what we do is we actually generate probabilities that a certain combination or a certain number of rooms are running at any period of time, and we're able to kind of triangulate or coordinate and see where the density of our minutes are occurring and as it tapers off throughout the day. So the bottom axis is the hour of the day. The y-axis is the number of rooms running. So you can see, based upon the orange color, kind of instantaneously where we have our density of minutes, where along the day most of our resources are being dedicated to running those rooms in the OR. So it's a good way to tell where we have day-to-day variability, and we're able to kind of pinpoint certain key players that are using those days. Certain surgeons may have a certain given day, so we can address that at a very granular level. So Brian, would you like to talk about some of the elements of effective block design?
And I'd start by saying I'm sure many institutions out there use a tried and trusted model of block utilization to determine allocation for different surgeons. Part of the challenges that we find everywhere is, the definition that goes into allocation, the nuances of release time, do cases count after blocks, so on and so forth. So we find ourselves in a murky world of, does this utilization really reflect how I use the OR? Because of that, we typically go into an institution and in place of just using block utilization, we'll actually look at practice patterns by day a week and look at how the surgeons are using the OR, and based on that, using some other metrics and some other variables, determine what each surgeon's block need is by day a week. And this gives us some insight into, again, like their practice patterns. So a new surgeon, we give them 4 hours on a Thursday, but looking at their practice patterns, we're seeing that this person's really busy and he's filling in any time that he can, so his volume is scattered all over the place. His utilization on Thursday may be solid, but we may just maintain his block, but we may miss the fact that he's using the OR all different sorts of the day or all different days of the week. So using this model, we really are able to maximize access for the most productive surgeons. And really we tie it to their practice patterns, which really helps us and helps the surgeons. And more what we're finding is that the data that we provide in our forecast is more reflective of how the surgeons use the OR, and they tend to buy into it more, which allows us to ease the process of reallocation. This also allows us to look at other things like, appropriate time for urgent emergent cases, making sure that we don't overblock the OR. If you're a tertiary institution, you're going to need time for add-on emergent cases, and, so we'll look at what volume of your cases are being scheduled within, or what kind of lead time, and I think Mike will go over that a little bit. And we'll determine what number of open rooms you need, and then what number of those open rooms need to be add-on time. This also minimizes the need for initial resources after hours, because what we'll try to do is if we can allocate it correctly, we can get the majority of the volume that's being done today within the parameters of the peak staffing, allowing for minimized overtime, which both nursing and anesthesia really like. This also allows us to forecast ICU admissions efficiently, and then when we do this with looking at ER data, we're able to look at bed management throughout the system. But these are some of the key things we look at when we're looking at effective block design. I'm going to move on to the next slide. So when we design block schedules about forecasting by demand, it load balances the OR. So, we'll see there are certain days where, hey, you need 12 rooms on Thursday, but you need 9 rooms on Monday. This staffing, anomaly, or is there a way to level load so that we can, manage people's shifts more appropriately? Improve surgeon access, like we talked about before. And then, like I said, it reduces the overtime costs. And Mike, if you want to add anything to this, by all means. But, for the most part, our overall objective, okay, is to provide a block model that is aligned with the way the surgeons use the OR, and so that we can maximize our volume per OR. And that is what our objective is out of these designs. Do you want to answer, Mike?
Yeah, I was going to highlight this visualization. We're actually looking here at a pretty large healthcare system across numerous, basically, surgical services or procedural sites across the location. We're able to see kind of the activity in terms of the minutes generated, and you can see the variability, the kind of peaks and valleys. Certain OR locations are busier than others, and we really get a gradient map. We all see, for the most part, certain institutions may taper down a little bit earlier. Some may not. Some may stay later. Some have higher peak minutes. Really, it's about getting a level of understanding and granularity, and then also being able to see the forest from the trees. So the analytics that are driving this is we're using these data to make decisions and get kind of a global view, which isn't often seen. A lot of times reports that are generated at a system level just kind of highlight some key KPIs, but it's hard to see really what's going on a day-to-day operational level so that you can appropriately design your staffing model, give anesthesia performance or productivity-based metrics, and address the needs of your most active surgeons. That's all I have to say about that, Brian.
Yeah, and I would add that, there's always this view of what's appropriate access. I mean, from a surgeon's perspective, appropriate access is, 50% utilization. That means whenever I call for an add-on case, you have time for me to add my case on. But I mean, in a best practice institution, we're looking at 75% utilization. And, I'm sure that people on this call are hearing this and have had the struggles where, surgeons want to run way more rooms than necessary, but then you have staff sitting idle, they're unproductive, and, OR directors are being held to some productive standard, but it's really difficult to accomplish if you don't have the number of rooms running appropriately or the number of rooms you're supposed to be running. So, a lot of times we come into places and it's a lot of noise. There's a lot of people who, talk about how much volume they have and how busy they are. But using this data, it allows us to have, like Mike said, a really, keen insight into the operations of the OR, and it helps kind of fight back some of the perceptions and allows us to have more thoughtful decision making on how the OR should run. Okay. So let's say we get all this accomplished. We are able to create a block grid that makes sense. Okay. One of the next challenges we're going to find is scheduling accuracy. Now, again, this is a very sensitive issue, but scheduling accuracy, and I'll tell you, everything from our perspective starts at the point of scheduling, and it's one of the most critical components of an efficient block schedule. So what you're going to see here, and Mike, you can talk to this chart better than I can, is just distribution of procedure time by service. And, these are some of the inputs we use into our forecast. We actually get as granular as the surgeon case duration and some of those variabilities as well. But, what this really allows us is to kind of help predict case duration. And we're going to talk more about some of the challenges there. But, Mike, again, you want to add anything here?
Sure. So what we're looking at is really just a rainbow plot of our specialty and the distribution of our procedure time, which is cut to close. And we all know that this introduces a great amount of variability into the day. Some cases run long, some cases run short. What I was really trying to illustrate here is that there are a few factors that we have when we schedule a procedure. And there are a lot of things that can kind of not necessarily go wrong, but add in some variability. Really, it starts at the point of scheduling. So you'll see we're dealing with long-tailed distributions, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later. But not only are we dealing with long-tailed distributions, we're dealing with multimodal distributions. So there are distributions within the distributions that are not really well understood or decomposed in an effective way, even within specific service lines and even within certain surgeons. So it's important to keep or have an understanding of kind of the randomness that can occur and be able to break things out and understand kind of where your potential sources of variability are, even at the point of scheduling. So that's really kind of the essential part is using those categorical variables to get some more insight about, in this case, certain specialties that might introduce a lot of variance into your day, or even particular surgeons or particular procedures that you do on a routine basis, to kind of have that level of insight so that you can build that into your model, predict a little bit better, and design an effective scheduling and block system.
So again, build on that. We'll look at scheduling accuracy, and this kind of goes into a little more detail what we're talking about. And like we said, everything really starts at the point of scheduling, like everything. So when one of the issues we find, particularly in most institutions, is most surgeons want to, for what my experience is, underrepresent their case time because they're more accustomed to, their cut to close as opposed to wheels in and wheels out. And in reality, their hour-long case is really an hour and a half to an hour 45 minutes, but they want to schedule 6 to 8, thinking that they're going to get done by 3, when in reality we all know they're going to be done by 5 or 6. So part of this allows us to predict, how long a block of a surgeon, or how long a block each surgeon needs. But it also gets us to a point of, how can we actually improve your predictability of case duration? And one of the things we find almost everywhere is the procedure dictionary that exists in the EMR is far more robust than it needs to be. I was at an institution recently that did 18,000 surgeries last year and 20 ORs, and they have 27,000 procedure names. 27,000 procedure names times the number of surgeons equals that many preference cards. So one of the things that we really try to do is say, okay, let's clean up your procedure dictionary so we have less variance in the procedure names that are being scheduled, so I have a more accurate depiction of case duration. Moreover, what you'll see is, I'll give you a good example, a lumbar laminectomy, level 1 versus level 4 is not the same. From a preference card perspective, it is exactly the same. So you want to maintain that maintenance of having one preference card because you don't want to actually have more preference card to maintain. But you might actually have a level 1 and a level 4 procedure name because one may be a 2-hour procedure where one might be a 4-hour. So, those are the sort of things that we try to introduce, from a procedure dictionary perspective, which makes tremendous improvements in case duration and also refines the number of preference cards needing to be maintained overall. This improves predictability of start times and helps resolve some of the equipment conflicts. I can't tell you how many, lap choles are scheduled open as opposed to laparoscopic, and we just have the wrong equipment to start. So we actually do a lot of work with this as well to make sure that, if you're going to hold surgeons to some historic reference, we need to make sure that the average case time that we're giving them is relevant in their world and in our world, but that starts with kind of cleaning up some of the EMR stuff that we need to.
Hey, Brian, I saw that we had a question concerning one of the visualizations that we had earlier, and the question was, do we run that rainbow graph per surgeon, and if so, over what period of time do we predict the next case time? So the answer is yes, but it wouldn't necessarily be across service lines. It would be across a certain number of procedures that exist in the EMR and certain combinations of procedures. So what we would do is we would probably look at the top 80% of those procedures, and what's typically done in a lot of EMR systems is the previous 10 cases are used and the high and low case times are removed as a form of truncating the distribution, and then the average case time is taken from there in order to schedule the previous time. We can actually use any case as far back as we want to go. The essential part of this is deciding and having some transparency around what methodology we're going to use. If we're going to use an average of whatever procedures have been done, the past 10 procedures, that just needs to be communicated. There are also some linear models, well, actually non-linear models that are used to predict that case time. That is not typically integrated in the EMR, but what we have found is we've run some more advanced models and been able to get our accuracy to a little bit higher degree, provided that the procedure level data is correct and we have a clean procedure dictionary. So I just wanted to address that, and if you have any further questions, I'm happy to continue along there. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Mike. Okay. So we get to this world where, we looked at data to drive the block grid. We determined how many rooms should be running every day of the week, figured out the drawdown. From there, we kind of looked at case duration. The next issue when it comes to block, that's a very sensitive topic, is release time. Okay. So This is very sensitive because most surgeons who don't have access, or if you're in an OR that's overblocked, they want really short releases because it's a way to preserve their access to the OR. But if a surgeon isn't using the OR and at 50% utilization or something around there, at a release of 0 or 1 day, I mean, you're literally holding an OR hostage or half an OR hostage every single day, okay, and that really prevents any other surgeon from electively able to use it. So what you see here is our analysis of average lead time, and we can drill this down by surgeon, by service, by group, so on and so forth, to determine what the release time should be appropriately for each of the blocks. Like I discussed at the onset of this, when we're starting our block grid, if I'm looking at the analysis, I say 20% of your volume is scheduled in 1 day. I mean, obviously, I want 20% of your grid available for add-on cases, because the last thing you want to do is have your OR overblocked with elected surgeons, okay, and not have enough room for your inpatients, so they get rolled over day after day after day, and then you essentially eat inpatient stays because you haven't created that bandwidth within your OR to allow those inpatients to be done. So part of this is also making sure that when we do block, that we're blocking in such a way that we maintain that level of capacity. So this kind of looks at lead time by service. Like I said, we can do it by surgeon or whatever level we want, and then it kind of gives us some insight into what the respective release time should be for these individuals. And this is information we bring back to a governing committee so that way they can help drive those decisions. Again, Mike, do you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, this was actually done in relation to a specific service in the hospital. It was the robotic service line, and there were many surgeons that wanted to access the robot, but it was difficult. In fact, they had a lot of issues using the robot room for non-robotic cases. So what we really wanted to do is see if we could design an effective release time. There was a very, very short release, I believe it was 24 hours, and even that was not adhered to. We tried to design an effective release time such that surgeons that were not scheduling appropriately would have reduced access, so the surgeons that were scheduling appropriately would have increased access. So we were trying to profile, and this is obviously it's anonymized data, trying to see what a true release time or an effectively designed release time, how that would affect the utilization of the robotic suite. So this was integrated as a part of the block redesign process, and for that matter, this is something that we go through all of our block redesign processes, is looking at lead time analysis on a service line basis so that we can appropriately design the block. The more effective release times that we have, the more open time, the more wiggle room we have in the OR, so that we build in a swim lane so that surgeons can have access when they need it.
And this also helps. I mean, I'm in an institution right now where 2/3 of their add-ons fall into 3 services. So knowing that, while I might have add-on space, those services that really have high add-on volume, I'm actually giving them shorter releases, anticipating that there's now a home for their add-ons. And then I still have an add-on room for the other third of add-on cases, but then we'll have a kind of an add-on urgent emergent policy that kind of governs the use of that room. But essentially, we won't anticipate elective cases being scheduled into it because through our analytics, we can, through some level of certainty, anticipate a volume occurring in those rooms every day. The other thing I want to mention is, to release time is those surgeons who are super users, those surgeons who are 75, 85% utilized in their block, are judicious of the OR time that they've been allocated, those surgeons, we really want to give them a carrot for being super users. And in that, if I'm expecting a block is 85% utilized week in, week out by a surgeon or by a group, we will recommend a shorter release just because we don't want to forego that time, okay, to anyone else anticipating that they're going to fill it. But it also gives surgeons something to work towards. So, you're 75% utilized at 7-day release. Hey, you know what? You just get your numbers up and we give you a shorter release. But it provides that carrot, or it creates something for them to work towards, as opposed to having a policy with a page of exceptions, which we see in multiple places. So we touched on release time. So we're going to go on to other issues that are probably sensitive to many ORs, and that's flip rooms. Okay, flip rooms are a big challenge for most institutions, and while they are very good in terms of efficiency if used appropriately, too often we find that they are used as a surgeon satisfier at the detriment of the OR. So Mike, do you want to go over this?
Sure. What we found is actually tracking the utilization of flip rooms is very difficult, especially in the instance of negative turnover. So what we found is we can often do something like provide a 30-minute turnover credit to those rooms. We can provide the average turnover for the institution to those rooms. We can provide the turnover credit attributable to a certain type of procedure that's in that room that's been aggregated in the past. There are a lot of solutions to it. It's just sort of a difficult number to track effectively, and it's hard being judicious about allocating flip rooms because oftentimes the people that are getting flip rooms are just the loudest. So it's important to have some data to support their justification in their mind for having these flip rooms. The other thing is we actually in redesigning the block, we move away temporarily from utilization in order to allocate and instead base things on the distributions that I was mentioning in the past, more specific to the kinds of cases, their case mix or the different kinds of cases that they're doing and when they're doing them. Down to the surgeon-specific level or the group-specific level, whoever will be requesting block time. So what we really do is introduce a methodology for institutions to track the productivity after the new block has been in place, and this is a methodology that we suggested to the institution for governing the use of their flip rooms after the block had been introduced to the institution. So it's really just kind of an illustration of kind of how we suggested to do it. This case had some negative turnover time because there was a PA closing and the surgeon would leave and go and start his next case. So that's really just kind of an illustration of that. What we really wanted to discuss is some of the takeaways, designing some governance around flipping rooms in order to maximize your utilization. And at a high level, what we found is what we need is 150 cases per flip room, or roughly 300 cases per business day. That's based on a 90-minute case start. And what we found is having that not case start, but a 90-minute procedure duration time in order to maximize our utilization, so that room is not sitting idle. And the other assumption is that this is happening within an 8-hour block. And of course, proactive case scheduling, and intelligent case scheduling is a big part of this. You would have your left joints or same laterality in room one and different laterality in another for efficiency in positioning the patient, prepping the patient, not having revisions, providing some other time elsewhere in the week for those longer, kind of more complicated cases to go. Really, you want to focus on efficiency and maximizing how those flip rooms are used so that you get the most bang for your buck. Did you want to add anything, Brian?
Yeah, I think there's a question out there is like the definition of a flip room. So definition of flip room would be essentially when we give one surgeon 2 ORs with 2 teams to maximize their ability to get volume done. This is seen most often with orthopedics. We've seen it with some other services, but primarily orthopedics with total joints is where you kind of see this trend. But you need some guidance or governance, like Mike was mentioning. Like I said, left joints in one room, right joints in another room. I mean, that's ideal. No revisions, or if you do a revision at the end of the day. And then, again, a case duration. I mean, I've seen And I think we've all experienced this, and it goes back to some of the case time discussions we had earlier. There are some surgeons who can whip out a total joint in less than an hour and a half. There are some people where they're 3 hours and they're still fiddling around in there. So, obviously this is giving people some context. Yes, we need to see 300 cases per business day for you to earn a flip room at a 90-minute case duration. But frankly speaking, if a surgeon is doing 3-hour cases or 2.5-hour cases, there's no way this model will work. So this gives you guys some, I don't want to say ammunition, but some insight into, what you should anticipate. This is really important right now where we see the total joints potentially falling off the CMS inpatient-only list. Those may fall into ambulatory centers where, if we see a mass migration of total joints to ASCs, this is going to become a more prevalent problem. So, but again, it's having the insight, before you block someone, or give them 2 rooms. And we've seen this many places, we promise block time. We go there and we see the surgeon over the last year did 150 total knees, and he's been out of the OR every day by 11 a.m. So it's really making sure that you guys have some understanding of when you block somebody in this model, okay, as to what you should expect or anticipate in terms of volume and how they should be using it. So I hope that. Yeah, Mike.
Sorry, I was going to add. It's not necessary. The case scheduling is really a big part of this too, and it's really not even relevant just to flip rooms. There needs to be kind of a body in place that can assess or have some knowledge about the way things are scheduled. I mean, there was one day where we were reviewing cases for the next day, and there had been an orthopedic surgeon that scheduled, a knee, a hip, another knee, and I think another hip again,
Yeah.
in the room, only had one room for the day. I mean, obviously, you want to match up those cases as much as possible, whether it's laterality or just for positioning for the procedure. Just having a proactive view, a system in place that will call your attention to that. Of course, there are always extraneous factors. Sometimes the patient can't come or they're coming from far away, but it's important that you have a certain level of communication so that if it's possible, you can be proactive in optimizing the use of your OR.
And so I think I got some other questions here about volume and those sort of things. So let's just get some context about these 300 cases per business day. I mean, at a very high level, what we're really saying is there may be 52 Mondays a year. Okay, let's just say 50 for the sake of Memorial Day and Labor Day, whatever holidays we lose. But if there's 50 business days a year, okay, times 6 cases, which is 3 cases per room, that's essentially your 300 cases we would anticipate in this model. But that's the 300 cases per business day we would anticipate. But again, that only works with a surgeon who's doing 90-minute cases. Like I said, if these cases are 2 hours or such, that 300, would be probably reduced to maybe 225, So those are some of the things, that's how we came up with that number. But in reality, that would put a surgeon at roughly 76% block utilization, which would be right kind of in the sweet spot of where we were looking for. So I hope that answers that. And there was another question I also saw about concurrent surgeries, and that is a very sensitive issue, and I will tell you that most institutions are dealing with this. I just left an institution where this became a very political issue with orthopedics. So there are a lot of different policies out there, and we've worked in many places about establishing them, about, concurrent versus simultaneous and what those mean, what is the critical part of the procedure, when do surgeons have to be present, those sort of things. And it has to be clearly documented or clearly written in the policy for you to hold anyone accountable. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about governance and how to establish these things. But there's a lot of, sensitivity around this. Especially now with concurrent surgeries. Let's see. Okay, I think that's pretty good. I think we have some more questions, but I want to make sure we get through the rest of the presentation, then we'll get back to some of these, okay? So I'm going to move on to the case study, and we'll talk about the daily huddle. So, Mike just talked about intelligent scheduling. Part of the problem that we have is most institutions kind of allow these surgeons to determine case order, case sequence, when they're going to come in, so on and so forth. And while we can sit back and we can proactively manage a schedule, it's actually having the insight and the intelligence as to what conflicts are we trying to prevent tomorrow, and having the authority to do those sort of things, So if I can see tomorrow I only have 3 C-arms, but I have 4 C-arm cases scheduled simultaneously, I have an issue. So those are some of the things we would look at, having a patient scheduled tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., knowing that this patient hasn't had any of their labs done from a PAT perspective, just tells us that patient is going to be a late start. So maybe they shouldn't be the first case of the day. Maybe we need to reorder that sequence. There's a lot of stuff that we try to do with that, providing insight at the daily huddle, looking proactively at tomorrow's schedule, the next day's schedule, the day after that, so that way we are actively managing any conflicts that may arise to create delays in our day to maximize production of our staff. Mike, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think, this isn't necessarily an analytical tool, but it is, like anything else, it is a sort of a QA process for the tools that you have in place. You've integrated an analytics strategy or developed an analytics strategy to right-size the capacity of your OR and provide access to your OR, but you are still in the game of variability reduction. There are limitations, of course, to the outcomes that analytical models can produce. So this is, in a lot of ways, a controlling step that integrates people and knowledgeable SMEs as a part of the process. In order to make sure that things run really smoothly. I can't stress. Predictive analytics have been around for some time and have advanced greatly with the advent with access to more information and more data, but we're still always in the game of variance reduction, and this is kind of, like I said, it's a controlling step or a way to catch errors before they happen using people, in order to proactively manage that. So I'm seeing some more questions, Brian, so we should probably get to those relatively soon.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're close to wrapping up here. And why don't we'll kind of get through these other slides real quick, and then we'll get to the questions. But functionally speaking, part of this is you can have all the greatest data in the world. You could be a report warehouse. It wouldn't matter. The data isn't going to someone to make a thoughtful decision. Most of what we've experienced is going into a place and using data to drown out the very, very loud voices, so that way we can actually get to thoughtful decision making. And that's where we get into the Surgical Service Exec Committee, our SSCC, we have a chairman and a medical director. We try to have a triad of anesthesia, surgery, and nursing that kind of do the governance or facilitate the meeting, but have surgeons represented, where they drive the operations or the rules of engagement and expectations of everybody, but based on the intelligence and data that we bring them. So, I can't tell a surgeon that your release time is now 7 days. And I need to go back to somebody and say, here's the practice patterns, here's the average lead time, this is what the utilization is, this is what we recommend, and then have a governing body that can make that decision so that way, it can actually, so there's some self-governing in place. And that surgeon who may be affected by that ruling or that decision, will go back and have those conversations with their colleagues as opposed to, yelling at administration that, people aren't treating them fairly. Not that I'm sure none of you have ever experienced that, but I hear it happens a lot. So I'm going to case impact, and functionally speaking, when you do this, especially for the triad model, you get the surgeons engaged because what they see is data that's reflective of how they use the OR. We have crucial conversations with them about their practice patterns, and they tend to increase their volume, because they're satisfied with allocation or they feel they had a voice in this process. Anesthesia's happy because the block grid is more relevant to them and their production is improved. Same thing with nursing. and overall the hospital is, because they're well positioned to function more efficiently and see $1 million improvements based on their size. Mike, do you want to go over this case study, and then we can get to questions right away?
Sure. What we really wanted to do is assess the impact of some of the things that we had done, and we saw that a pretty statistically significant improvement over years prior, but this is just really a snapshot from the prior year. A couple of metrics, looking at the volume trends that was available, we saw a pretty significant increase after the new block system had been rolled out. We saw consistently better utilization with some vacations in August that brought utilization down, but we were still able to see improved volume there. I really would we have some good questions. We can go back. I'd like to go. I'm looking at question 6 here. Can you give us an example of a level procedure? I'm not sure what you refer to by a level procedure. So maybe you could send in another one, and hopefully we can give you an example. But the next one is, we had a thought, regarding, again, looking at some case times on a surgeon-specific basis. We would take a service line, run the distribution per surgeon in that line to derive specific surgeon case times in order to find efficiency gains. And yeah, that's certainly a plausible method. In fact, a lot of times what we do is through the governance body, we'll present them data within service lines so that they can evaluate themselves amongst their peers. Of course, we can always anonymize the data or provide them with an anonymous hash so they can go back and look up their data in a key. But it's amazing. I mean, surgeons are oftentimes very competitive people and are looking to improve themselves. Obviously, in the clinic, in the most clinically safe way possible, but they're very competitive. So when they see themselves stacked up against their peers, especially within certain service lines, we do see a drastic improvement and a reduction, even in case time, sometimes in that instance. So we had another question: what is the definition of a flip room? I think we addressed that. It's just 2 ORs running simultaneously, dedicated to the same surgeon. And is it just for quick cases? Not necessarily. There are some, there are oftentimes total joints, upper and lower extremity done in flip rooms. There are many different service lines that have had flip rooms, not just orthopedics.
I would say, though, well, just with regards to that, a lot of places would put in a minimum case time,
right.
So that way it's, minimum case time in 90 minutes or hour for whatever your organization agrees to. But it helps offset the surgeon who takes 2.5 hours to do a procedure and wants to run 2 rooms. So we see that a lot in terms of a flip room policy. But then what that does, it opens up for any service, so long as they meet the criteria of your flip room guidelines.
We had another question regarding the Senate and their discussion of the flip rooms. I think it has been on many hospital administrators' radars. We haven't seen any necessarily drastic action being taken yet. I at least at the clients that I've been, Brian, have you heard any different?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, in many places we'll establish flip room policies, kind of what we discussed earlier, but in that, they will, and it's really working with your orthopedists who tend to be the impacted by this the most, but helping define what is the critical part of the critical portion of the surgery that they have to be present for, what that means, and having a governing body that can adopt it and then hold people accountable to it. So, I mean, there is a lot of language out there, and there are a lot of different versions of the policies, but it really comes down to what your iteration of, or how you want to bake in the critical portion of the surgery. I think that's kind of what a lot of things hinge on with that concurrent part with the Senate.
So we had another question, and I think this was related to the flip rooms, 300 cases per business day per year. That's a rough approximation. Yeah, what we really mean when we're referring to that is, if you have a surgeon that operates on a Tuesday, they would need to do 300 cases on that Tuesday if they're being dedicated to rooms in order to maximize their use. They would come out to roughly 76% utilization in an 8-hour window, provided they were using that any given Tuesday of the year, roughly.
I think the next couple of questions with the EGDs, I think those kind of touch with the flippers we talked about. I see a question here about cardiac and flipping surgeons who do more than one case in a heart room. So I'll tell you, the only time I've ever seen hearts or neuro, or if they're flipping, they're doing a big case and a very, very small case. I don't really see them flipping for two majors at the same time. And again, I would caution against that. I understand it kind of releases some time in the morning, but and whoever wrote this is right. You really have to have a leader of the service who's on top of things and making sure that the surgeons are doing their part. See a question here about effective strategies for improving first case on time starts with the biggest offenders. And almost everywhere we go, the biggest offender is the surgeon who shows up at 7:30 for a 7:30 start. So this is a common issue everywhere we go. This is one of the biggest things that we have to fix. And I'll tell you, again, part of it is starting with cleaning up your own backyard. We will not go to surgeons and tell them you need to show up at 7:15 for a 7:30 start or 7 o'clock for a 7:30 start with the block until we know that we have the equipment right, we have the procedures right, the sequence is accurate. We know that the patients we have identified to be the first case on time or first case start of the day are patients who have been processed through PAT and are cleared. So we try to clean up operations on our end, okay, and then go through a thoughtful effort of collecting data on where the fallouts are. At that point, once you cleaned up your backyard, it's easy to highlight, yeah, you know what, we're waiting on you, surgeon. We're waiting on you. We're waiting on you. We're waiting on you. But again, functionally speaking, unless expectations are determined by some governing body as to, is a surgeon on time if they show up at 7:15 for a 7:30 start? I would say no if they didn't get the H&P done, the consent's not signed, they haven't marked the site inside, they haven't had an interview with the patient, they haven't talked to the family. If they haven't done those things, if they just walked in at 7:15 and aren't even in scrubs, are they really on time for a first case start? But you need to identify, okay, what the expectations are and what the timelines are from your 7:30 or 8 o'clock start time, and and all the expectations for these individuals. And frankly, you need to audit. If you need to be out there auditing on a regular basis and course correcting and making sure that you have the support from either governing body or from administration to hold these surgeons accountable. I've been many places where we had surgery report cards, and surgeons are competitive. Mike mentioned it earlier. We have frequent offender lists. We've showed it to governance. We've escalated it every way we can escalate it to let the surgeons know that, this is something that's very important to us, and you need to hold up your end. Another alternate solution is staggered starts. That comes with its own bag of, challenges. But I'll tell you, if a surgeon shows up at 7:30 for a 7:30 start, if you schedule him at 8 o'clock, he's going to show up at 8 o'clock. It's kind of a pattern of behavior that you need to kind of course correct. So very, very, very familiar with first case on time starts and how to manage that stuff. See a question here about who is part of the huddle. So the huddle primarily is members from PAT, anesthesiology, the OR director or OR manager, people from pre-op, and members of sterile supplies and finance. The goal is that we would kind of go around. So I have 30 patients tomorrow. Do I have any clearance issues or finance issues I need to worry about for the patient tomorrow? Do I have all the equipment I need for these patients tomorrow? Am I waiting on a vendor? From a PAT perspective, is there anything I need to worry about? This patient has low iron. We're going to have to, test them tomorrow morning or whatever it may be. The goal is that you have this proactive huddle the day before so that you're looking at all these conflicts. Surgeon X said that he's going to do these 3 cases. He can do them in 45 minutes. Well, history shows it takes 4 hours. So why are we scheduling 45 minutes for this procedure? We need to correct that now because Surgeon X is going to follow is going to get, is going to get screwed or something. You know what I mean? So those are all the things at the huddle we try to manage proactively. But again, you need to give the members of that huddle, you need to empower them to make these decisions and proactively manage the schedule. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying you just do things arbitrarily. Obviously, any change comes with some, communication to the surgeon as to how their schedule is going to change tomorrow. And for the most part, we find the surgeons are very happy to know that, listen, we're preventing a delay for you tomorrow, okay, by changing your sequence this way and this way. Sometimes they'll push back, but for the most part, they're pretty accommodating. But you need to give that huddle the empowerment to proactively manage. Okay. Let's see. Any more questions here? So I see a question for block schedule, and whether it's for a individual surgeon, a block of surgeon, or for a group of surgeons. So functionally speaking, whatever way they want it. Now, my preference, honestly, is either surgeon groups or service blocks. Where appropriate, I like doing individual blocks, when surgeons justify the volume. But there are certain services like gynecology, some urology, that it's difficult for them to fill an entire day themselves. And in lieu of giving half blocks or 4-hour blocks or 2-hour blocks, I'd rather give a service block. But the way you manage that stuff is you hold the service accountable to the utilization by day a week. And that's one of the things you need to really identify when you look at utilization in the future is, 70% utilization is one thing, but if you're 40% on Tuesday and 90% on Thursday, well, I want to know that. And when you provide service blocks, what you really want to provide is the day-a-week utilization and contribution by surgeon. So because behind the scenes, they know who's supposed to be working on what days. So they can hold themselves accountable to utilization, so it's collegial pressure to get someone to use the appropriate day. And also, if they hire a new surgeon, they look at their own schedule and say, hey, listen, we're underutilized on Tuesday. Guess which day you're going to be filling? So it's kind of a way for them to be able to manage their own, time internally, but it only works if you have insight and intelligence to provide them for them to make those decisions.
You need to look at the contribution that each surgeon, if they are a member of the group, the contribution that each specific surgeon contributes to the block time that's been dedicated in that instance. The trick in developing the new block schedule is ensuring that you have designed your clusters or your groups effectively. You make sure that you have a group member and you know ahead of time who's going to be contributing time to that group. Oftentimes we see groups that have dedicated group time and an individual surgeon that's a member of that group that has time. So there's horse trading that goes on, which makes things difficult. So it's important to measure the surgeon contribution to see, again, profile who is operating and whether they're contributing to maybe their own specific individual time or whether they're operating within their group's block time. There's a lot of nuances. It's a very nuanced effect. It's important to have an understanding of those things when you're designing your model.
And just to add to that, one of the values of a group block is, functionally speaking, one of the rules I'd have in a group block is you have to fill your block before you get a second room. So if I have two surgeons from the same orthopedic service and they both have a case on Tuesday, ideally they need to fill that 8-hour day. So Surgeon X is going to follow Surgeon Y in room 1, okay, and fill their utilization before they get a second room. That holds a first case on time start available for somebody else. But that block is a Surgeon X block, okay? Surgeon Y's case doesn't provide any utilization credit to Surgeon X. So that Surgeon Y, even though he's part of the same group, is going to request a second first case start, okay? And those are some of the benefits you get from the service block as opposed to the individual surgeon block, But ideally, you're looking at, I don't want to create a service block if I know Surgeon X is going to fill that block every single day. I'm basically preventing anyone else in that service to get any time. So, we look at a service level, but we drill down into individual surgeons and we'll offer the individual time so that way, they're not competing within their group. I hate to say this, but I think we only have 2 more minutes, so I don't know if we're going to be able to take any more questions, but let's see if there's anything else we have here.
So I saw a quick one. What OR utilization rate do you require prior to granting additional block time? Typically, we want surgeons topping out well over, or 85% or higher. There's not a lot of wiggle room within that schedule. So that's typically the number. There's a sweet spot. We like to think of utilization kind of like a football goalpost, really. And within that goalpost, you're hitting the prime target for the institution. Surgeons think they can operate whenever they want. They can just kick the ball into the air, and they're providing a service to the hospital. But really, to maximize efficiency, you have to hit those goalposts. So as soon as you're going wide right, around over 85%, it may be time to evaluate, how to either increase the block time, so move from if he's got 85% or 90% in an 8-hour block, to give him a 10-hour block or a 12-hour block, or maybe a block on a different day if you feel like he's got enough cases in the queue and can fill that time.
Well, I think we have run out of time, Brian and Michael. We certainly had some very interesting questions. There are some more questions that are left, but we will be sending those to Brian and Michael to answer for you. We certainly appreciate Surgical Directions for sponsoring this webinar, and we hope that you have gotten some valuable information from it. If you are interested in seeing the archived presentation, it will be available for you in approximately 48 hours after this live webinar. Also, you can go on the website to take the post-test and evaluation for your contact hours. On behalf of our manager, Surgical Directions, we appreciate your attendance today and wish you a good rest of your day. That will complete our webinar for this morning. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.